right, so welcome back to another episode of SEEK Bytes. Today on the podcast, we have a super special guest. A very warm welcome to long-time listener, listen to every episode, he's told us. We have James Ross, CTO of SEEK, joining us today. I'm also joined by Raph and Seamus Carney.
I could tell you.
He nearly called you Sean.
Yeah.
I was like, almost, and I was like, no, Carney. He's told me, I remember. And as always, I'm Elliott Miller. So, James, welcome to the podcast. I'm so excited to have you on.
I'm excited to be here. You're triggering my imposter syndrome saying I'm a super special guest though. I'm just a regular, ordinary guest. Very happy to be here.
Well,
nice
super
to see
special
behind
to
the
us,
scenes.
maybe.
Nice to see behind the scenes.
For context, for those of you listening. So when we were first coming up with the idea of a podcast, James was one of the people who was enthusiastic and very excited for us to do it and for it to be a thing. So quite exciting for us as hosts.
Never miss one.
It's probably a good thing to have the head of technology backing a technology-oriented podcast.
Yeah. So for us, extra special for the people on the podcast. The thing that we were super excited to talk about to start with was unification. So if you're not at SEEK, you probably don't know what that means and don't care, and that's okay. But James, hopefully you could tell us what was unification?
Yeah.
Can I interject? What would you call it if it wasn't called unification, which would be our internal branding for it, I guess? What would you call this globalization of a business? What's the generally accepted term?
Business people would say it's post-acquisition merger or that kind of thing, or post-acquisition integration.
Yep.
Business people would say integration of multiple businesses into one. So for those who aren't from SEEK and aren't out there, SEEK has been through what I would say in my career is the thing that most deserves the term transformation. This is a term that gets thrown around in the industry, doing transformations of this and that and the other thing.
This has been transformative.
This is the one, almost 40 years into my tech career, this is the one that deserves the term. But to understand what it is, you sort of have to go back to the first principles of what SEEK's business is. So I don't know what you were all doing in 1997. You're probably in primary school. But, the first wave of the internet came along in the mid-90s, and basically there was a big trend of all the classifieds going online, right? So we used to have all these employment ads and car ads and all that stuff in newspapers, and they were all going online. And despite this podcast being by engineers for engineers, or is it for engineers by engineers, whatever.
We always, yep.
Whichever one it is. The fact is that people don't come to SEEK or a business like SEEK because of how beautiful our code is. The candidates come to SEEK because that's where the jobs are, and the employers come to SEEK because that's where the candidates are. So that you've got to understand that the fundamental nature of SEEK's business is that it's a marketplace. And when you have business dynamics of a marketplace, you tend to get, in a competitive environment, a winner tends to emerge. Right? Not always winner take all, but you tend to get a dominant player emerge. So what was happening in that first internet wave, all over the world, this obvious trend to take classifieds online was happening, and in every place around the world, there tended to be a winner emerge. So SEEK emerged as the winner in Australia. A company called JobStreet that we'll talk more about emerged as the winner in some markets in Southeast Asia, particularly Malaysia, Singapore, Indonesia, Philippines, and another business we'll be talking about called JobsDB emerged as the dominant player in Hong Kong and Thailand. So when you're a business like SEEK and you go, okay, we've come to dominate the market for employment ads and employment marketplaces in Australia and New Zealand, by the way. Hello, everyone in New Zealand. How do you grow, right? How do you grow? And you grow, one of the classic ways to grow is geographically. So you imagine you're SEEK and you've come to dominate the market in Australia. How do you grow? Well, one way you might imagine is that you just go and launch SEEK in Hong Kong. The problem is that if JobsDB's already won that market, launching SEEK, you're not going to get anywhere. So the fundamental nature of these network effects businesses is that when there's a dominant player emerge, it's very hard to come in and displace them. So if you want to grow geographically, then you start growing by acquisition. So if you go back 10 or 15 years, SEEK started acquiring interests in businesses like SEEK. So what people in Australia don't know, everyone in Australia has heard of SEEK, but they might not know that SEEK as a business has SEEK plus JobStreet plus JobsDB plus OCC in Mexico and Catho in Brazil. We've been acquiring businesses like SEEK in multiple countries. So then you go, okay, now the problem is that when we have a brilliant idea, and we have lots of brilliant ideas, when I arrived at SEEK, for example, the competitive idea that we were trying to implement was variable pricing. So for the first couple of decades of its existence, SEEK had a very simple pricing model. I wasn't here, I'm not the expert, so, but basically you pay X dollars for an ad for 30 days, and there were some deals with people who posted a lot of ads, but basically one price, one offering. And what that means is, so let's say the price is $300. If you are a business that's looking to hire a data scientist, for example, that are very hard to find, you might be willing to pay a lot more than that. So at that high end of the market, you're probably leaving money on the table at that price point. And then down at the more mass market end, like where you might be trying to hire some staff for your cafe, $300 might be not too much, right? So you're probably missing out on business at that end, okay? So the idea of introducing variable pricing was there to say, well, let's try and charge less when that's a reasonable thing to do, and let's try and charge a bit more when that's a reasonable thing to do. And you go, well, that's a good idea. Let's do that.
Makes a lot of sense.
Makes a lot of sense. So it's just an example of the sort of thing you want to do to compete, okay? So SEEK decided this is how we need to compete. Now, the problem is it took us, the good news is that that idea worked. And when I say worked, it made the marketplace better, easier, better for both parties kind of model like this. So it worked, but it took us 2 years to do. And when we were done, it was only done in ANZ. So then you go, okay, well, that worked. That was a great idea. Thank you, strategy team. Very well executed. Thank you, software engineers. Thanks to all the customers. They're all happier. We're happier. Now we have to go and do it again the 4 other businesses. So this is the fundamental problem. You come up with a great idea to compete. You do it. And it works, and then you got to do it again and again and again and again. So what you want as a software engineering team is to be able to do it once. That's it. So what you've got to face is you've bought these businesses because buying them is the right thing to do. You couldn't just launch your product in these countries. So you've got to buy them, and then you've got this problem. Well, now I've got to do the things 3, 4, 5 times. So unification for us, to explain it to everyone out there, imagine you've got 3 businesses that are all effectively doing the same thing. They're all employment marketplaces in different countries, all owned by SEEK. And our dream is to be able to write the software once and ship it to everyone. And if you think about Australia is a very small population, right? We have, say, 26 million people. New Zealand has 5 million, so there's 31 million. Indonesia has 275, across Asia Pacific, there's 400 million people. So when we looked at our portfolio of systems, the basic situation we faced is that the system in Australia was the best technically, and that's just because it had been invested in more. So we had done the cloud transition, we'd done the agile transition, we'd done the DevOps transition, automated testing, automated building, automated deploying, all that cool stuff that everyone takes for granted. That had been less true in the other business who had less money to invest in those things. So the fundamental situation we had was that the Australian tech was the best, but the Asia opportunity is the best. Just massive. So unification is really about taking our best capability to our biggest opportunity. And the way we did it was basically spend a couple of years making the ANZ system have sufficient features to be able to operate in those markets, brought all the data across, brought all the customers across, and we've finished that a couple of months ago. And now we're in the process of decommissioning the former system. So now, all of you, when you're writing code, it's not just for the 30 million people in Australia and New Zealand, it's for 430 million people across APAC. So every line of code is able to, just be a force multiplier.
I don't know what you'd call that other than transformative.
That's a good word.
Yeah.
Interesting that you said that Australia's systems seem better? Or how did you objectively measure that we should pick on, AU systems rather than an Asia system?
That's a really great question.
Yeah, I wasn't here at the time, okay? But my understanding is that it is, if you look over the last 20 years of tech evolution, the big things that have happened in terms of modernizing, so agile ways of working, automation, mobile, cloud, AI, okay? If you've got a company that has just been more proactive and more successful at getting through all those waves of change and making and successfully transitioning them, it's not that it's you said objective. I don't know that I'm going to satisfactorily answer the question, but when you look, what does a modern tech stack look like? SEEK in Australia was years down the AI road before it got hip. Years down automated builds, automated testing, automated deployment, cloud, right? The teams in Asia just hadn't gotten as far down that journey, right? So the apps were on servers racked and stacked in data centers with manual deployments and manual testing and
old school.
It's like
today's standards. Yeah.
So, all I can say is it's not rocket science to come to the conclusion we came to.
Sounds like it's fairly objective, right? Like not subjective in that sense. It's not like, the code was written more cleanly, but it was objectively more efficient to operate the business in ANZ than in the other markets. Based on things like you were saying, having local server racks versus having things in the cloud, that kind of stuff.
Surely this happens all the time. If one company buys another company, it's like, great, they have some ideas or IP or tech that you want, but then you kind of don't want the rest of it. So you've got to somehow merge that into your existing things. The two boxes can't necessarily stay separate. You kind of want it in one box.
You'd be surprised how often companies don't see that through, right? I'm not an expert in the ROI on acquisitions, but there's quite a lot of folklore that companies make an argument about the benefits they'll get when they do an acquisition and they don't materialize, right? It's harder than you think. Like what we've just been through, we talked about coming on the podcast and talking about unification months ago, and I remember saying to Glenn, hello Glenn, the producer, maybe we should wait and see if we pull it off, right? Like this is the hardest thing I've ever seen any company attempt. And it's the hardest thing I've ever been involved in. And I've never been more proud of any company for pulling it off or for a team for pulling it off. This is amazing. There are companies that aren't that far away that I won't name who've tried to do exactly the same thing and given up and backtracked and then sold their businesses in Asia. This is really, really hard.
I can say, sorry, as one of the people, Raph was on the team with me as well. We were in one of the first teams to start Unification and one of the last teams to finish Unification just from the nature of moving around the business. And yeah, I would agree. It was extremely challenging. We've seen the entire business transform, not just its technology, but its culture as well. I imagine that it would have had significant, like you said, career-defining challenges in some cases, like one of the most challenging projects for a CTO, for a high-level executive to work on. And I'm sure it's felt that way all the way up the chain from entry engineers all the way up to the CTO.
Yeah, this is a huge bet by the company, and just could not be happier that we've pulled it off. It really is generational. It's the biggest thing in 25 years at SEEK.
How did that get across the line then? Like, who had to have buy-in to say, yes, we should do this?
It was all the way to the top, as you can imagine. We should say I didn't give enough of the history. I wasn't here, but it wasn't like the first attempt at this worked. We had a couple of different approaches to bringing the businesses together. So, for example, there was a period several years before I started where there was a strategy of building some services that all the businesses could use. Okay, so let's try building some shared services. So that approach went for a while. Then there was the period when the hire side of the business was focused on the Horizon project. We were doing candidate unification. So let's just try and bring the candidate side of the business together. And that was what was happening when I got here in 2020. A few of us started to talk with the exec about, based on how we're going, how long will it take? And it was going to take quite a long time to do candidate first, probably 3 years there, come back and do hire, maybe another 3 years there. And nobody wanted it to take that long. So all the discussions were, can we do it faster? Okay, how can we do it faster? How can we do it faster? How can we do it faster? And so all sorts of discussions about all the ways you might be able to do it faster. But at the end of the day, the most important decision we came to about how to do it faster was to commit and to commit to doing it all, both sides of the marketplace, both of the JobStreet and JobsDB businesses very close together, and to really, like, by commit, I mean almost all of our effort of everyone across the business for multiple years focused on this. And I've never seen any other business do that. So that could only come from the exec. And I've never seen an executive team more aligned behind a single thing. Often at companies, you'll get a couple of leaders who want to do something, but other people think, yeah, that's fine, but I'm really trying to do this. This was the most incredible demonstration of alignment and commitment that I've ever seen.
So what were some of the major challenges that you know of that we, SEEK faced along the way while doing this project?
Oh, how long have we got? The most basic one, if I'm talking to people outside SEEK about this project, I think the biggest one is that we just didn't have the capability to pull it off. So we had to bring in a bunch of help from outside, right? We estimated how many software engineers we'd need to do this in an amount of time that we considered desirable or acceptable. And it was like, at some point we had 150 roles open in our team just for software engineers, right? We need another 150 software engineers. So the most fundamental thing we didn't have was the capacity or the capability to actually pull it off. So just capacity, engineering, like all of you, being a classic example. And the other one is probably the coordination, the program management of the whole thing. So SEEK had years before gone through the agile transformation and got ourselves into those habits that probably everyone listening to this will be familiar with, which was you're just delivering shipping code every day, you commit, you ship, you go around again, and that's the whole beauty of it. You make small changes every day and you just roll, right? This project could not be done that way. If you care, we can go into the theory about why it couldn't be done incrementally, but park that. So you had to effectively do an unnatural, for us, a quite unnatural act that I never ever want to do, which is write a whole bunch of code and not ship it for a long time, and then ship it, right? So I never want to do that. You probably never want to do that. And we had to have 50 teams, round figures, all coordinate and hit dates that meshed together. And that's not normally how we like to work. We like teams to be autonomous, as autonomous as possible. So
logistically, 50, like the second somebody says 50 teams, I'm like, that's a lot of people and engineers to try and coordinate. Like if you said just get 50 engineers and we all want them to agree on one way of doing things, like good luck with that.
Times 10.
How do you get 100 opinions about something? Get 10 engineers in a room.
Yeah.
Right? So huge. So just capacity and coordination would probably be the big ones I would call out. And working in a way that wasn't natural for us. So culturally, you're taking massive risks by bringing in a whole bunch of people quickly who don't understand SEEK, right? That's very risky culturally, right? So working in ways you don't really want to work and the people don't really want to work, and you've got to say, I know, but for this we have to do it. So it costs a lot of money to bring in like outside help of top tier. So a lot of money, a lot of cultural issues, lots of just coordination. I mean, you all lived through it. You can tell me what it was like. But the way I think about it is that was all effectively like you can imagine a rocket going out onto a launch pad. The gantry isn't part of the rocket, but you need that to get it into position. and then you can throw it away, right? So a lot of that has all been torn back down, and we're now getting back to working as autonomously as possible on iterative deliver every day custom delivery, just one big team with 450 million people on the other end.
For someone leading an engineering team, I guess either at your level or all the way down to just a couple of teams, how do you come to the decision that doing a big bang, almost waterfall sort of approach was the way or only way to go from the sounds of things?
Yeah, so another way to phrase the question is like, why can't you do it incrementally?
Right.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So an employment marketplace is not a product in the same way that, let's say, a Canva or an Atlassian is a product, right? So if you take Canva as another, example of an Australian tech company, you as an individual, if you can get benefit out of using Canva on your own. Okay. You just go to Canva, you design your thing, and you go away again, right? So if Canva were doing a massive re-engineering thing and wanted to roll everyone onto it, it absolutely makes sense to do it incrementally, right? Everyone's on the old system, you introduce a new one, you put one person on it and then two people on it, and they seem happy, and you bring more across, and right? So that incremental rollout of a massive new platform makes perfect sense in that context, okay? When you're talking about a marketplace, so the country of the Philippines as an employment marketplace, there's no benefit to a hirer coming across on their own to a new system, okay? Because it's not the system. They can't get any benefit from the system. The benefit to them is all the other people.
It's the data, right? Because you can't just have portions of there's no value in having 10%.
No.
The jobs or 10% of the candidates. You need 100%.
Correct.
That's what all the value
There
is.
is absolutely no value in having some of the people on the new platform in the Philippines and some on the old. There's absolutely no value in that. So you have to have the marketplace. So think of all the hirers and candidates in that country. They have to always be able to talk to each other. Always. You can never slice them in half and divide it into two marketplaces. Okay, so if you've got that problem, then your only choice architecturally is either to make two-way synchronization between the new system and the old system so that you effectively make a composite system. So you can, if you're connected to either system, you can see the whole thing. And two-way synchronization of data is one of the hardest problems you could solve. And I definitely voted against any intention to do two-way synchronization across these systems. I just believe it's almost impossible. So what you end up doing is saying, okay, what we can do though is one-way synchronization. So we set up a mechanism well ahead of the cutover, as you all know, because you were here, whereby whatever happened in the systems in Asia, we effectively took a copy, brought it over into the ANZ system, so that over a very long period of time we accumulated all the data for all those systems while they were still operating on the old system. So we had a copy and we could test it in place with real data, real live data. And a one-way synchronization is a tractable problem. Sending it all back and having it all work is not. So, and then on the cutover point, once we were happy, we did a weekend cutover where all the people just transitioned, they reroute the DNS and they now land here. So we brought all the people over in one big go, but we brought the data over a long, long period of time in that one directional way. So it was really a combination of the nature of the business being a marketplace that prevented it being done incrementally, and also partly the technical challenge of doing it would have been, I think we would have got ourselves wrapped around the axle pretty quickly.
That's such an interesting concept that I can't say I've ever really thought about when you think about a software engineering company, the idea of a marketplace, because I can totally imagine like software as a service. Yeah, we build this thing, you pay us to use it. It was a very transactional one way, whereas this way it's all or nothing, right, as a marketplace.
Yep.
But you can't go to the marketplace and be like, there's nothing here. Well, I guess I won't use this thing. So That's
it's really important, I think, for engineers. I'll probably, if we come back later and talk about career advice like I was talking to Seamus about, I think one of the things that software engineers need to probably generally get better at is understanding the businesses they're in, because it is really, really important. The context of the business you're in is critically important.
Mm.
And it does
really
change your
interesting one.
technical decisions.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it changes your experience.
Yeah, if you can understand what the business values and how you can work towards contributing to that value, it's really impactful on your own career growth as well. Like the people, I've said this before, I think on the podcast as well, the people who are in power or the people who are, leadership positions, they recognize that value add that you bring as well.
You should definitely say leadership positions, not power.
Power.
One of the things you find out when you get these fancy titles and these jobs and you try to move the joystick to the right, it's like, is this thing connected?
That is a really fantastic point. And that's something I wanted to ask you about, because there must have been organizational challenges, right? You said you weren't here at the time, but let's say you were, for argument's sake. How do you get the buy-in? How do you move that joystick and say, yeah, we're going over here now. This is what we're doing. Everyone on board over here.
I don't think I did, right? Your question presumes that I convinced anyone we should do this.
How does one do it, I guess?
How does one do it? I don't think one does, really. I think this has definitely come from the top. It's not like a bunch of technology people convinced the executive to do this, right? They challenged us to do this, and we thankfully met the challenge, right? There was certainly organisational challenges left, right, and centre, and still are as we tear it all down and get into the next phase of remembering how to do things the way we like to do them, right? There's organisational challenges all the time. But, if your question is fundamentally how do you get people to do stuff you want them to do, that's a bigger topic. But I would summarise it by saying that there's a famous book called Influence, and there's another one called Influencer. I can't remember which one this is from. But basically, if people think that they can do something and there's a good reason to do it, then they probably will do it. It's basically, are they willing and are they able, and do they feel that, right? So I think a lot of leadership, there's another really good book recommendation, while we're doing book recommendations, The Progress Principle, because a lot of times people will say, how do you motivate people? It's like, I don't think I do. Like the presumption that motivation comes from a leader and gets delivered into a person, I think is a nonsensical notion. And if you read The Progress Principle, it will explain what I believe, which is that people want to find meaning. So they want to do things that matter, and they want to make progress towards that. So the core of senior leadership positions, I think, is really helping people find meaning in what they're doing and helping them make progress in what they're doing. And the motivation comes from the people, right? It's meaningful and they're making progress, so they're feeling pretty good.
So basically, if you weren't in the know, and I'm going to pretend I don't know what happened and don't know the answer to some of these questions, but if you heard there's going to be this massive merger essentially between these three companies, you're like, cool, so who's getting fired? If we're turning off a bunch of systems, if we're getting rid of them, it's like some people in a capitalist society may go, well, I guess we don't need those people anymore, right?
Yes.
If we can make the Australian market and engineer support global, why do we need all these people?
Yes.
So
no, it is a very common, you're absolutely right. Not a lot, but usually some of the value of mergers is removal of duplication, right? So you don't need two finance departments anymore, you need one, right? So proceed with your question. I can imagine what it's going to be. Did we do that? Why did we not do that? Yeah. So all through this process, SEEK has done no layoffs. I think we're quite unusual in the last few years of tech. And certainly not in engineering. So, we had an Australian software engineering team. We had one based in Malaysia supporting JobStreet, one in Hong Kong supporting JobsDB, each working on their separate products. And the TLDR of what we did is bring them all together into one bigger team, working on the one bigger system. So much better scale, and we didn't wait. The thing I was most proud of us doing with regard to the people in Asia whose systems we were turning off, some of them had been working there 20 years working on those systems.
That's a really long time.
Yeah. I really, really refused to wait, to make them wait until we were finished to bring them across and work on the future tech stack. It was like completely unacceptable. So a year or two out, about 18 months out, we outsourced the care of those systems to an outside company and merged our folks from our Asia teams into our new APAC teams. So they've been working on the new stack for 18 months ahead of the cutover date. So I was really, really pleased about that. And, we're still trying to hire more. So when you hear something like that, that seems like that's got to be the exception to the rule, right? Like it's I haven't been through enough of them to say, but it is certainly not. SEEK is definitely cares more for its people than most companies. I'm comfortable saying that from what I gather.
Yep.
So yeah, we put when we brought the folks from the Asia teams across into the merged integrated teams, every single person was asked, what domain do you want to work in? You've been working in, say, talent search. Do you want to stay in that domain? You've been working with these people. Like, what do you want to optimize for? Who your manager is, what the tech stack is, what the team is, what the domain is. And we tried to just do a best match of what everyone's preference was and settle them into a new home. So, and it's good that everyone was screaming out for help, right? So it's like when we have our grads come in and, everybody wants grads. So the grads are made to feel wanted because all the teams pitch to them. And I know you had Scott on. I listened to the episode of that. It's a really part, Raph can tell you about it. Like I presume it makes you feel valued when the teams are all saying, please come and join us. Please come and join us.
I remember the day, I think Seamus and I were in the same team, and we were talking this exact conversation. And our team's splitting, and these are kind of things you could be working on in this team, and these kind of things you could be working on in this team, and go have a think about what you want to do. And I just thought that was a nice surprise. I was expecting someone to say, "You're in this team now, and this is what you're doing."
Yeah, not everybody got that choice though. I was one of those people who was like, at that point, I was an SME on some engineering pieces that were kind of critical and vital to our systems, like the blob store, the validation of all of our resumes, that kind of stuff. And you don't really want to lose the people that are critically involved with, critical systems like that. So I didn't get that option. But at the time, I remember that being pretty conflicting for me, because I remember you were, I was your grad buddy at the time. So I was kind of like your pseudo mentor coach at the time. And it was only for 2 weeks, right? And then the teams got split up. But I think, looking back now, it was a really good thing because it put me in a position to be able to onboard a lot of the people from SEEK Asia. So I got a lot of experience, not just from an engineering perspective, learning how these other teams worked, but also from a personal cultural experience as well, learning that the way that I spoke to people was always, oh, you're so good at communicating. And now suddenly I had to wind all that back and relearn how to interact with people is like fundamentally a big shift for me. But I think that on the whole, I think everyone's gotten value out of that experience, whether you're on Raph's side or my side with that transition.
Just to extend on the pitch, not just grads get that pitched as well to join my team. When we had central hiring as well, we do have several teams who are looking for engineers, and they would pitch what they do as well to the person being hired. So you go through the hiring process. You're not hired for a team. You're just hired as an engineer, and then you get to pick a team. So I thought that was really cool.
There must have been some cultural challenges that came along the way with that when you've got, Australians are very outspoken and loudmouth, such as myself. So
join the club.
So
safe space, Elliott.
So, when you're integrating a whole bunch of engineers and people and finance, it's like all sorts of different skills into essentially, the one company. So there must have been some cultural challenges along the way.
Still are. Yeah, these problems are not solved. I don't think you ever do solve them. But good faith engagement is the foundation. We have some cross-cultural training. A lot of companies would do that. We have, I often ask our senior folks in our other locations for advice, like, how would you handle this situation? I think it's really important to seek advice. Certain cultures. I remember many years ago at a different company, we were setting up a new team in India, and we invested really heavily in cross-cultural training, and there were some amazing takeaways from that, depending on how vulnerable I am in the next 15 minutes, you'll hear about. But the takeaway, there's these spectrums you can place cultures on, right? And I'm not an expert here. Go and read the Culture Maps. It's a really good book. But you can imagine there's these spectrums such as, individualistic versus collective. Some cultures are more individualistic and some are more collective. Some are more hierarchical, some are more egalitarian. You get these different dimensions where these social scientists plot cultures on, okay? And one of the key takeaways as an Australian in that training was that we're the odd ones. Okay? So if you look at where cultures around the world land on individual versus collective, we're way up one end individualistic, we're way up one end egalitarian. Most cultures are not, right? So in most of these things, and I don't have them in front of me, but Australia was more often an outlier and India was more often bang in the middle. So normal, culturally normal, and it's like, okay, this is this is the first thing to understand is your own culture always feels normal to you, but having a little bit of awareness that it's not is interesting. I remember on the very first morning we brought nearly everyone over from Indian team to do this cultural training, maybe 30 people. It was early building this team. And we had this first morning session, and we had this very expensive professor from Melbourne University who was an expert in these issues come to talk to us all. And we were all in the opening session together, the Australians and the folks from India. And then, after about an hour, she said, okay, for the second session, we'll have a little break, and then we'll get the folks in India to go over to the other room. We'll do some stuff separately. So we'll have the Australians together and we'll do some stuff. We'll have the Indian folks together and you'll do some stuff. And so all the Indian folks go out to the other room. And then she looked at me and said, I'm just going to have to go and apologise for your behaviour to our Indian colleagues. I'll be back in a minute.
Oh, boy.
Right? So like, okay, right, what have I done? And so she came back and I said, what have I done? And she said, you called me Margaret. So this is Professor Margaret Byrne from Melbourne University. Hello, Margaret, if you're listening. And she said, in this context, I am the senior person because we're talking about cultural issues and I'm a professor of Melbourne University. I'm Dr. Margaret Byrne. And you don't know me, but being an Australian, you feel perfectly comfortable putting your hand up and saying, excuse me, Margaret. All I'd done was say, excuse me, Margaret, can I just ask a clarifying question? Right? That's all I'd done, which is what an Australian feels comfortable doing because we're egalitarian. And that is offensive, potentially, to people who, it's like, wow, that's really rude to use a first name, a familiar
So it wasn't
name.
It wasn't the interruption and asking the question.
No.
It was the addressing instead of
Dr. Byrne.
Dr. Byrne.
Yes.
It was, excuse me, Margaret.
Yes.
Wow, that's
Yeah.
that's
So
absolutely fascinating.
it is fascinating. And I remember I was like, so you go through all this turmoil of, beating yourself up and, after about a year of going back and forth to India and building this team, I remember sitting down with one of the people who'd worked with us the longest by that time, this fabulous BA we had, and I was out to lunch with her and I said, I want to ask you a helpful, I need some feedback here. Can I ask you a question? We've worked together for a while. I feel comfortable asking you this question. And she said, sure. I said, how often do you find my behaviour offensive? And she laughed and said, every day.
Oof.
Right? So, and you're like, oh, really? Like, what? And it turns out, you know, and she didn't mind. She just thought it was a funny question because, of course, it's every day. You're doing stuff. I remember one of our senior leaders had some relationship issues in his team because we were setting up a new office over there. And you know, you're an Australian person, you go over there and network cables need to be connected. So you get under the table and you start connecting them. And he apparently ended up having people in his team think he wasn't a senior person because he got under the table and plugged in some cables, right? So, you know what I mean? Your natural behaviour. So the bad news is you can't solve these problems, right? All you can have is kindness to each other and a bit of understanding of the likelihood that you are offending people regularly, and don't set the bar too high. We're all doing it, and just, you know, ask for feedback and try things and give people different ways to interact.
I think that's probably SEEK's secret to success in terms of
I feel like there's
getting
a really
this project
good
across the line.
accidental pun in there. I like it.
The secret to success, to success. Yeah, I think, honestly though, I think that is the golden hammer behind SEEK's success in this unification project. And you were saying that, you know, you've seen I'm sure there's a lot of business out there who try, end up winding it back. They don't see the ROI on this kind of scale of, what was the word that you used? Acquisition, right? This merger. But because at its core, SEEK treats everyone who works here as a human being and not just a value add, it means that when we have these cultural points of friction, because we are so open to each other, we're able to work through them and talk through them as a team and figure out our ways of working. And I've worked at a few large companies, previous technology roles, and I think by a large margin, SEEK feels much more human in the way that we deal with each other. And I really do think that that's how we got through this so successfully, or how we're still going through it successfully.
I agree. It's well above the norm. Well above the norm. There's plenty of companies that treat people with respect, but I wouldn't say it's the norm.
Every time we try to talk about unification, even being an engineering podcast, the conversation always gravitates around people problems, because fundamentally, like I was saying, I think the success lies in how we treat our people. Engineering problems are engineering problems everywhere you go. They don't, at scale, large companies deal with very similar issues. If your problem space is similar, you're going to be dealing with very similar issues. You know what I mean? But when you start trying to do this kind of like global acquisition thing, the people problems, I think, is where you'll start to fail more than the engineering challenges. You get great engineers, they'll solve great challenges, but it's when those people can't get along, when their cultural differences create too much of a divide, that friction costs you time, costs you resources, and ultimately where the project would fail.
I completely agree. This was never going to be about the technical challenge. Not that wasn't there, but I can't recall. The big technical challenges for the folks who don't know what we're talking about, like data migration and scalability were some of the really big ones. I never had a moment's doubt that we would meet those challenges. Like, the technical team is really good. It was all those other problems that were going to be
In terms of the people and the tech problems, one of the things I wondered about is what. You mentioned before there was someone who'd been at the company for 20 years at JobStreet or JobsDB, I forget which one. How do you get someone like that on board with a project like Unification when they may have a very strong emotional attachment to the code or the product that they've been working on or selling or being a part of for 20 years?
It's not one thing that you do, but we did a lot of repetition of the why, I think, in a lot of comms about the why. And the leaders in Asia are who the folks in those businesses look to. Their buy-in was total, right? Because they could see the benefits to their businesses of being on the unified platform, because the investment in their local systems wasn't happening. And all the investment was here, so they wanted that. And they led a fantastic change effort that we didn't see it so much here in ANZ because the ANZ business wasn't really changing. It was on that system. They were already on that system. So all the change impact was in Asia. And they did the most incredible job of understanding the needs of everyone who was going through, like we have professional change managers here, and they literally think about the humans and go, what is that person going to be facing? They're going to be facing not understanding how this works and how this works and what this means and how to do this. And they were so proactive with creating training materials, and they had quizzes and surveys and double checked that people had got it. And if they hadn't got it, they went back and did the training again, and they did all this celebration stuff. It was amazing. So basically making people feel bought into the journey and the why. I'm not saying it mitigates all of that. Like if you spent 20 years working on a system and it's now deleted, like I can't tell you that's a fun thing to go through. It's not. But we only have this unified business because those people built those businesses. So like we have love and respect for what they did. And now when we've welcomed them into this future together and done our best to make that a good experience, and they've pretty much all come on that journey. So it's a massive combination of the leaders role modeling, being positive about it and genuinely including the people in the future.